I'm Dr. Mike Gradisar, Head of Sleep Science at Sleep Cycle. I'm a clinical psychologist specialising in sleep disorders, and I've been helping people sleep better for the past 20 years. But I haven't been satisfied with just helping people in my own hometown. Basically, I've come to Sleep Cycle to help millions of people around the world, including you. When people say that they have trouble sleeping, they can say that they're aware of the action of their heart. Sometimes they realise they haven't been breathing properly in a while. But it's the brain that's the biggest organ when it comes to sleep. So why is it when the lights go off that suddenly we get smashed around the face with all of our worries? But more importantly, what can we do about it? So when we go about our usual day, we don't really pay attention to all of those worries that start building themselves up at the back of the mind. And it's only when we go to bed and we turn the light off and when our head hits a pillow that suddenly all of those worries go straight to the front. Suddenly we start to think. We think about what happened during the day, things that didn't go well, things that you need to do coming up, things you need to plan for. And then after a while, you start to go, how come I'm not sleeping? And then suddenly, this fella here, he starts to become really important. And you start to do maths. You start to think about, how long have I got until I can fall asleep? If I fall asleep, how much time have I got? Now, while you can get rid of this fella, we're going to teach you some better techniques, ones that can actually address your thoughts and try to take more control over your thoughts. Once that's done, then you can start to prepare your body and relax and allow sleep to enter. But first, why does this happen? So as we fall asleep, we will maybe notice that our breathing rate starts to decrease, our heart rate starts to decrease. And what's interesting is also that our mental activity starts to really quieten down. Now, all of these processes are very natural. We're really letting go of our environment. And what happens physiologically is that we're really having a part of our nervous system that's starting to take over. It's called the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, that's a lot of words, a lot of syllables, but probably not the most important thing if you're experiencing sleep issues. The other side of our nervous system is called the sympathetic nervous system, and that does the complete opposite. If your sympathetic nervous system starts to activate, you'll start to pay attention to your surroundings, and that's the complete opposite to sleep. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is connected to both stress and anxiety. And in fact, anxiety disorders will have essentially this activated sympathetic nervous system, very similar to insomnia. And a core component to that is something called hyperarousal. That essentially means that your arousal level is higher than it should be. The idea is to try to really decrease this hyperarousal so that you can actually fall asleep. And one way to do that is to really focus down on the mental activity. What you might notice is that you start to worry when you're in bed. So there's two types of negative thinking. One is worry. Now, you might be familiar with worry. Worry is really thinking about future events, but thinking about them in a sort of negative way, like something's going to go wrong. Now, the other one is rumination. Rumination is essentially when you are reflecting back on past events, but just seeing them in a negative lens, like seeing them in a negative way. If you combine these two together, you've actually got something called perseverative negative thinking. And scientists have come up with this essentially because when they look at worry and they look at rumination, they find statistically a lot of overlap between the two. Now, the good news is that as much as it might feel like you are subject to these negative thoughts when you're in bed, you can actually learn how to turn them around. So rather than being subject to these negative thoughts, we're actually going to teach you some techniques so that you can actually shift the dial from this negative style of thinking and move it much more towards the positive end, taking control of your own thoughts and helping you fall asleep. So when we interview people who have trouble sleeping, they often mention two words, mind racing. They really say that they're thinking about everything but nothing of real importance or meaning, that they've got all of these thoughts that are whizzing through their mind like they've got a tornado in their head. And when we think about thoughts, scientifically speaking, a word for that is cognitions. And what we're going to be teaching you today are cognitive techniques. So cognitive techniques are really looking at our negative thoughts and seeing if we can start to train ourselves to think, say, more neutrally or even more positively. And we're going to go through 3 specific cognitive techniques that have been shown scientifically to help you worry less and sleep better. So the first technique is called cognitive refocusing. And just like it sounds, the idea is to really refocus your thoughts. So if you can imagine a situation where you're lying in bed and you feel like you're really sort of attracting this river of negative thoughts, these intrusive thoughts, understand that you actually have the power to sort of choose what you want to think about. Now, this does require a little bit of pre-planning. The idea is to sort of have a theme, something that you can think about that you would really enjoy thinking about. Say, for example, it might be a previous holiday that you went on. You can start to sort of reflect and think about that holiday. Or it might be a holiday that you would love to go on. You are allowed to choose whatever you want. It doesn't have to be real, it can be a fantasy. Just as long as it's pleasant and it's not too stimulating. Now, the idea is if you practice this every single night when you're having trouble falling asleep, and you do this for at least 2 weeks or more, what you'll notice is you start to automatically do this habit. You start to actually shift the way that you are thinking, and therefore you're more likely to fall back to sleep. So the second technique is called cognitive distraction. And like it sounds, what we're doing is we're actually distracting ourselves from our thoughts. So once again, rather than being subject to all of these negative thoughts, having this river of negativity flowing into our mind, we can actually distract ourselves. So we're not necessarily doing a technique where we're meeting it head on. We're just sort of looking over here, so to speak. Now, one example of cognitive distraction is watching TV. Now, I know that sounds weird, but just hear me out. When we've done research ourselves, looking at all these other studies, getting all of their data that have looked at the correlation between TV and sleep, we look at the overall correlation and it's 0. It is basically saying that there's no relationship between watching TV and sleep. In a subsequent study, we actually had people coming into our sleep lab. We got them to watch TV in an hour before bed, in bed, and guess what happened? A third of them fell asleep whilst watching TV. Then eventually when we asked them to fall asleep, they took like 4 minutes to fall asleep. Now, if you're going to do a technique like that, just make sure that the screen is dim, have the volume down, and you don't have to go to another room. You can actually watch TV in bed, as the science has shown. And you don't have to necessarily watch TV. You could do something else. You could listen to something, music, a podcast. You can find a technique for yourself. But give it a go. You might actually find that you drift off. And finally, the third cognitive technique is called mindfulness body scan. Now, you may have heard of a body scan, but just hear me out. Now, the nice thing about a body scan is that it's got 2 components. One where we do address the thoughts, but the other one is really looking at our body and preparing our body for sleep. Now, often when we're thinking and we're starting to worry, we're not really thinking about our breath. We sort of goes in the background and it becomes a bit shallow. Now, the idea behind a body scan is that we start to focus on our breath. We start to crank the engine, so to speak, to prepare ourselves for sleep. We start to think about having even, regular breaths and just concentrating on that. And then after a while, what happens is inevitably you might start drifting off with your thoughts. You might start to think about what you've got to do tomorrow. You might start to reflect back on what happened today. When that happens, you just recognize it happens. Bring yourself back to the present moment. Think about your breath. Think about how nice it is to be in bed, how you can stretch out your legs, how your head feels on the soft pillow. Thinking about the present moment is much more neutral and possibly much more pleasant than actually thinking about negative thoughts forward or back. Now, again, research has shown that if you practice this enough, you'll find that you're able to fall asleep a lot quicker. And this can happen as short as 1 week. But if it doesn't happen after 1 week, just keep giving it a go. It's been shown to work, and it can work for you. So in summary, we want you to know that you're okay, you're normal. It's an actual normal experience to lie there in bed and basically have these thoughts intruding upon your brain. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can actually take back control. We've taught you 3 techniques to really shift that dial from negative through to positive. Those techniques have been cognitive distraction, cognitive refocusing, and mindfulness body scan. And you know what? We'd love to hear from you. What did you try? Which one didn't work? Which one did? How well are you sleeping now? Hang out with us on social media. Tell us what you think. We'd love to hear from you.